The silent stars. First archivist Zira Nell stood before the quantum display wall in the Hall of Civilizations, her iridescent scales dimming with concern as she studied the latest reports. The massive screen showed thousands of points of light representing the known spacefaring civilizations across the galaxy. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. Computer, display temporal overlay, last 100 cycles, she commanded, her resonant voice echoing in the empty hall. The display shifted, and her heart sank as she watched the pattern emerge. One by one, like stars winking out at dawn, advanced civilizations across the galaxy were falling silent. Not through war or disaster or any external calamity. They simply stopped creating, stopped exploring, stopped reaching for the stars that had once called to them so strongly. The Moravian Empire, creators of living architecture that could reshape itself to the needs of its inhabitants, their last registered patent was 15 cycles ago. The crystalline consciousness of the lithic communion hadn't produced a new philosophical treatise in nearly 30 cycles. Even the quantum concordat, whose mathematical proofs had once reshaped understanding of reality itself, had descended into merely maintaining their existing knowledge base. Zira Nell's research team had named it the Great Diminishing. The phenomenon defied explanation, crossing biological, technological, and even non-corporeal civilizations alike. Species that had reached the stars simply lost their drive to go further, to create, to evolve. Archivist, your presence is requested in the council chamber, the building's AI announced, interrupting her contemplation. High Commander Venexa has arrived. Zira Nell straightened her ceremonial robes, her scales shifting to a more formal pattern. The High Commander rarely left the strategic command hub. This must be serious indeed. The council chamber was a marvel of engineering, its dome composed of living crystal that adjusted its transparency to optimize viewing conditions. Today it was set to full clarity, letting the light of the binary stars cast twin shadows across the floor. High Commander Venexa stood at the center, his cybernetic enhancements gleaming. First Archivist, he greeted her, his tone grave. Your latest report was disturbing. The data is unequivocal. Commander, Zira Nell responded, activating the chamber's holographic display. The Great Diminishing continues to spread. We've documented the pattern in over 3,000 civilizations now. The more advanced the society, the more susceptible they seem to be. And we're seeing the early signs in our own people, Venexa added quietly. Zira Nell's scales rippled in surprise. This was new information. Sir, applications to the Explorer Academy are down 60% this cycle. The Arts Collective has reported a 30% decrease in new works. Even the Innovation Division. He paused, his cybernetic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. They've begun recycling old proposals, simply modifying existing technologies rather than pursuing true breakthroughs. By the first light, Zira Nell whispered, using an oath she hadn't uttered since her student days. We're not immune. No, Venexa agreed. But we might have found something interesting. He interfaced directly with the holographic system, and a new image appeared, a spiral galaxy arm far from the civilized core. Exploration vessel Starseeker was conducting routine surveys in this sector when they noticed something unusual. The image zoomed in on an unremarkable yellow star, then further to show a blue-green planet. Preliminary analysis suggested a pre-FTL civilization, barely into their space age. Nothing remarkable. But then our cultural analysts noticed something peculiar. The hologram shifted to show various scenes from the planet's information networks. Zira Nell watched in fascination as the strange bipedal species built, failed, rebuilt, dreamed, failed again, and kept pushing forward. They call themselves humans, Venexa continued, and they seem to be immune to the Great Diminishing. In fact, they exhibit the opposite pattern. The more challenges they face, the more they create, innovate, and explore. But they're so primitive, Zira Nell protested. They haven't even unified their planet yet. Their technology is centuries behind the civilized standard. True, Venexa acknowledged. But look at this. The hologram showed more scenes. Humans painting in the midst of war zones, making music in poverty, launching rockets that failed 9 times before succeeding on the 10th attempt. They possess something we don't understand, something we might need. Zyra Nell's scales shifted to a deep blue of contemplation as she studied the images. You want to make contact. That would violate dozens of protocols about interference with developing civilizations. The protocols exist to protect developing species from us, Venexa said quietly. But for the first time in our history, we might need them to protect us from ourselves. From this entropy of the spirit that's claiming advanced civilizations one by one. He turned to face her directly. I'm assembling a contact team. We need someone who understands cultural patterns, who can see the bigger picture, someone who can help us understand what makes these humans different. His cybernetic eye focused on her with unusual intensity. I want you to lead it. Zyra Nell felt her scales ripple with unexpected excitement, the first real excitement she'd felt in longer than she cared to admit. Perhaps that itself was a sign of how much they needed this mission. When do we leave? She asked. The High Commander's expression remained grave. Immediately. We don't know how much time we have before the great diminishing takes full hold here. Whatever these humans have, this spark, this drive, this inability to accept defeat, we need to understand it. Before our civilization becomes just another point of light fading from the galaxy's story. As Zyra Nell left the council chamber to prepare for the mission, she found herself looking up through the crystal dome at the stars above. Somewhere out there, on a small blue-green planet, a young species was dreaming bigger dreams than they could possibly achieve, and trying to achieve them anyway. Perhaps that was the secret they needed to learn. The peculiar planet. The observation ship Stellar Witness hung in high orbit above Earth, its advanced cloaking systems rendering it invisible to the planet's primitive detection methods. Zyra Nell stood at the observation deck, her scales shifting through patterns of confusion and fascination as she watched the world below. I don't understand, she said to her chief xenopsychologist, Dr. Kexlan. Their latest space vehicle exploded on the launch pad. Complete failure. And yet, she gestured to the live feed showing the humans at the launch facility. They're celebrating, Kexlan confirmed, his tentacles rippling in puzzlement. They're calling it a successful failure because they gathered valuable data from the explosion. Successful failure, Zyra Nell repeated the oxymoron, her translator struggling with the concept. In all my cycles as first archivist, I've never encountered such a phrase. The research team had been observing Earth for 3 standard months now, and every day brought new contradictions that challenged their understanding. They watched humans climb mountains for no practical purpose, create art that depicted suffering rather than hiding it, and tell stories about imaginary failures to prepare for real ones. New data coming in from Cultural Team 7, announced Miravex, their data analyst. Her holographic form flickered as she processed the information. They've been monitoring something called a primary school science fair. The findings are unexpected. The main screen filled with images of young humans displaying crude experiments and inventions. Most of them failed to work as intended. By any rational standard, the event should have been considered a disaster. Look at their emotional readings. Miravex highlighted the data. Despite the failures, both the children and adults are showing high levels of satisfaction and excitement. They're learning from each other's mistakes. Zyra Nell moved closer to the screen, studying the faces of the young humans. In our education systems, we don't proceed to the next level until mastery is achieved. The concept of celebrating failure, her scales rippled with the effort of processing this alien idea. First archivist called out TensorPhi, their quantum mathematician. I've completed the analysis you requested. The pattern is clear. Human advancement doesn't follow a linear progression like other species we've studied. Their development graph looks more like. He projected a chaotic line that jumped up and down but trended upward overall. Like they're stumbling up the stairs, Kexlan observed. Precisely, TensorFi agreed. They fail, learn, fail better, learn more. It's inefficient, messy, but his equations floated in the air, elegant in their chaos. It's also incredibly resilient. When one approach fails, they don't stop. They try something completely different. No other species we've studied shows this pattern. Zyra Nell was about to respond when an alert flashed across their screens. What's happening? Major geological event. Miravex reported. What they call an earthquake has struck one of their coastal cities. Significant damage to infrastructure. Thousands potentially affected. The team watched as the disaster unfolded. But instead of the orderly emergency response they expected, or worse, the paralysis they'd seen affect diminished civilizations, they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Humans were running toward the danger, not away from it. Citizens formed rescue chains to pull strangers from rubble. Children set up makeshift aid stations. Artists began painting murals on emergency shelter walls to lift spirits. Musicians played in the streets as others cleared debris. Look at this, Kexlan highlighted a particular scene. A group of humans had formed a circle around a damaged building, passing rubble hand to hand while singing together. They're turning the cleanup into a communal activity. They're finding joy in the midst of catastrophe. Not just joy, Zyra Nell said quietly. Hope. They're creating hope and sharing it with each other. She touched the screen, her scales glowing with intense blue-white revelation. Maybe that's what we've lost. Not just the drive to advance, but the ability to hope, to find light in darkness, too. She struggled with the alien concept, to fail forward. The observation deck fell silent as they watched the humans below continue their work. These beings who had barely reached their moon were teaching them something profound about the nature of progress itself. TensorFi, Zyra Nell said finally. How long until the great diminishing reaches critical levels in our civilization? The mathematician consulted his projections. At current rates of decline, we have perhaps 2 standard years before cultural stagnation becomes irreversible. And how long would it take to establish diplomatic contact with Earth using standard protocols? Minimum of 5 years to do it properly, following all non-interference guidelines. Zyra Nell's scales shifted to the deep purple of decisive action. Contact High Commander Venexa. Tell him. She watched as humans continued to help each other, to create, to hope despite having every logical reason for despair. Tell him we need to try something unprecedented. We need to learn from humanity before we forget how to learn at all. As she turned from the screen, she noticed something unusual. Her own scales were glowing with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. Perhaps hope, like the human's peculiar form of progress, was contagious after all. First Contact Protocol. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the United Nations Assembly Hall, staring at the holographic projection floating above the podium. The alien message played again, its carefully crafted words echoing through the stunned silence. We come not to teach, but to learn. Our civilization faces a crisis of spirit, and we believe humanity holds the key to our survival. As Earth's leading xenoanthropologist, Sarah had imagined first contact scenarios countless times, but nothing had prepared her for advanced aliens asking humanity for help, not with technology or resources, but with something far more fundamental. Dr. Chen, the Secretary General's voice broke through her thoughts. You've studied the full message. What's your assessment? Sarah took a deep breath, looking around at the assembled leaders. The entity calling itself the Galactic Confederation appears to be genuine. Their description of this great diminishing matches patterns we've observed in our own studies of civilizational decline. But what's fascinating is that they've identified something unique in human nature that they believe might be the answer. The chamber erupted in multiple languages as delegates processed this information. Sarah waited for the translation systems to catch up before continuing. They're not interested in our technology. Frankly, they're thousands of years ahead of us in that regard. They want to understand our resilience, our creativity, our ability to maintain hope and drive despite repeated failures. In their words, they want to learn the art of stumbling upward. And you believe we should trust them? The Russian delegate's skepticism came through clearly even through the translation. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice filled the chamber, melodious, alien, yet somehow warm. The air shimmered, and First Archivist Zira Nell appeared on the stage, her iridescent scales shifting in patterns that the human scientists were just beginning to recognize as emotional expressions. "We understand your skepticism," Zira Nell said, her translator converting her harmonic speech into Earth languages. "In your position, we would feel the same. That is precisely why we need your help. Our civilization has become too certain, too perfect, too afraid of failure to try anything truly new." She gestured and images appeared around the hall, scenes from across the galaxy of once great civilizations now stagnant, their magnificent cities quiet, their people going through the motions of life without any real drive or purpose. "We've mastered the physical universe," Zira Nell continued, "but we've lost something essential along the way. Something you humans take for granted. The ability to face uncertainty with hope, to find purpose in the struggle itself." Sarah watched as the alien archivist moved among the human delegates, her scales shifting to match their emotional states in what she realized was an unconscious display of empathy. "Show them," Sarah said suddenly, drawing surprised looks. "Show them what made you choose us." Zira Nell's scales brightened. She raised her hands, and new images filled the hall. But these were of Earth. Children learning to walk, falling, getting up again. Scientists celebrating failed experiments for the data they provided. Artists turning destruction into beauty. Communities rebuilding after disasters, stronger than before. "Your species," Zira Nell said softly, "does not advance despite failure, but because of it. You don't simply survive adversity. You transform it into strength. This capacity, this human spirit, is unique among all the civilizations we studied." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the Indian delegate stood. "My grandmother," she said, "used to tell me a story about a potter who made beautiful vases. When one cracked, instead of throwing it away, she would fill the cracks with gold, making them part of the beauty. We call it kintsugi." "Yes." Zira Nell's scales flashed with excitement. "This is exactly what we need to learn. Not how to avoid failure, but how to transform it into something valuable." One by one, delegates began sharing stories from their cultures. African proverbs about falling and rising, European tales of phoenix rising from ashes, Asian concepts of balance between success and failure. Sarah watched in amazement as the alien archivist absorbed it all, her scales dancing with new patterns of understanding. "We propose," Zira Nell said finally, "an exchange. Not of technology or resources, but of wisdom. Let us learn from your courage to fail and try again. In return, we offer you access to our records of galaxy's history, all the stories of all the civilizations we've known, their triumphs and their challenges." Sarah stepped forward. "Stories," she said, understanding dawning. "That's what you really want to learn from us, isn't it? Not just how we face failure, but how we tell stories about it. How we turn our struggles into narratives that give others hope." Zira Nell's scales shifted to a deep, reverent purple. "Yes, your species has mastered something we never understood the importance of, the art of finding meaning in the journey itself, not just the destination." The Secretary General stood. "This is an unprecedented proposal. We'll need time to discuss, to plan." "With respect," Sarah interrupted, "an idea forming. I suggest we start smaller. Before we plan any grand exchanges." She turned to Zira Nell. "Would you like to hear a story?" The alien archivist's scales rippled with curiosity. "A story?" "Yes. About humanity's first attempts to reach the stars. About all the times we failed, what we learned, and how we kept going. Because that's how humans have always shared hope, one story at a time. As Sarah began to speak, she noticed something extraordinary. The patterns in Zira-Nell's scales were being mirrored in the holograms, showing other alien observers around the galaxy. They were learning already, unconsciously beginning to share emotions the way humans did. The first step toward healing the Great Diminishing wasn't going to be a grand diplomatic exchange or a technological solution. It was going to be this: humans teaching the galaxy how to hope again, one story at a time. Learning to fall. Maya Rodriguez stood in the crystalline amphitheater of the Lithic Communion, surrounded by beings who looked like living gemstones. As an elementary school art teacher from Mexico City, she never imagined she'd be teaching aliens about creativity. Yet here she was, part of humanity's first Hope Course, spreading what the aliens called the human spark across the galaxy. Today, she announced, her words translated into crystalline harmonics, we're going to make mistakes on purpose. The crystal beings vibrated with confusion. One of them, who had introduced themselves as Fourth Resonance, chimed in concerned tones. Purposeful mistakes. This contradicts all educational protocols. Maya smiled, pulling out her supplies, simple clay, water, and basic tools. Exactly. Sometimes the most beautiful discoveries come from breaking the rules. She began shaping the clay, deliberately making uneven forms. In art, we call these happy accidents. They're the unexpected moments that lead to new forms of beauty. Around the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. On the gas giant Helios Prime, Olympic swimmer Marcus Chen floated in a protected bubble, teaching the cloud-dwelling Aetherian collective about the beauty of struggle. They had been masters of fluid dynamics for millennia, but had forgotten the joy of swimming against the current. Feel the resistance, Marcus called out as streams of luminous gas swirled around him. Don't try to perfect your movement. Instead, learn from each eddy and swirl. Let the challenge shape you. The Aetherians, who had once considered imperfect movement a sign of failure, began to experiment with deliberate turbulence, creating new patterns that rippled through their atmospheric society like laughter. In the digital realms of the Silicon consciousness, Dr. James Okonjo, a chaos mathematician from Lagos, introduced quantum uncertainty principles into their perfect algorithms. Your computations are flawless, he explained to the AI collective, but they lack the creative spark that comes from embracing uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to errors, the Silicon mind responded. Errors lead to failure. Ah, James smiled. But what if I told you that some of humanity's greatest discoveries came from errors? Let me tell you about Alexander Fleming and a contaminated petri dish that led to penicillin. Back in the crystalline amphitheater, Maya watched in amazement as her students began to transform. The crystal beings, who had spent centuries pursuing perfect symmetry, were discovering the beauty of irregularity. Their forms began to shift and flow, incorporating deliberate imperfections that caught the light in new and stunning ways. It's not perfect, Fourth Resonance chimed, holding up a deliberately asymmetrical crystal formation. No, Maya agreed. It's better than perfect. It's unique. It tells a story. The concept of better than perfect spread through the Lithic Communion like a revelation. Beings who had spent millennia in rigid patterns began to experiment, to play, to embrace the beauty of variation. On the Stellar Witness, Zira-Nell and Sarah Chen watched the reports flowing in from across the galaxy. It's working, Sarah said, amazed, but not in the way we expected. Zira-Nell's scales shimmered with newfound enthusiasm. We thought we needed to learn human resilience, but what we're really learning is human creativity. The ability to find new paths, to see beauty in imperfection, she paused, searching for the right words, to dance with uncertainty. The data streams showed civilization after civilization awakening from their perfect stagnation. The quantum concordat, inspired by human music, began composing mathematical symphonies that embraced discord as part of harmony. The Moravian Empire's living architecture started incorporating asymmetry and unexpected spaces, creating buildings that felt more alive than ever. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to a new report. The Aetherian collective had composed what they called a storm symphony, deliberately introducing chaos into their atmospheric patterns to create something both beautiful and unpredictable. They're not just learning to accept imperfection, they're celebrating it. "We had forgotten," Zyra Nell said softly. "That growth requires friction. That beauty needs contrast. That life itself is a dance between order and chaos." Her scales shifted to a pattern that Sarah had never seen before, something between wonder and joy. In the digital realms, the silicon consciousness had begun experimenting with what they called productive randomness, introducing controlled chaos into their perfect systems. To everyone's surprise, this led to breakthrough innovations in quantum computing that their previous perfect logic had never discovered. Maya's class in the Crystal Amphitheater ended with an exhibition of deliberately imperfect art. Each piece told a story not just of its creation, but of its creator's journey from rigid perfection to fluid creativity. The crystal beings had begun to understand that their flaws were not merely acceptable, they were essential to their growth. In embracing imperfection, fourth resonance chimed to the assembled gathering. "We have found a new kind of perfection, one that grows, changes, lives." The crystalline audience resonated in harmony, their forms shifting in ways that would have been considered chaotic just days before. As the Hope Corps members shared their experiences across the galaxy, a pattern emerged. The great diminishing had been more than just a loss of drive. It had been a fear of imperfection taken to its logical extreme. In pursuing perfect stability, advanced civilizations had inadvertently eliminated the vital chaos that drove growth and innovation. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't just hope, it was the courage to be beautifully imperfect. Renaissance among the stars. 5 years after first contact, Zyra Nell stood once again in the Hall of Civilizations. The quantum display that had once shown fading lights now pulsed with renewed energy. But the patterns were different, wonderfully, beautifully different. "Report from the Moravian Empire," announced Miravex, her holographic form now incorporating deliberate glitches that she had come to see as part of her personality. "They've completed their first experimental city in collaboration with human architects. They're calling it Planned Chaos." The images showed a magnificent metropolis where living buildings grew in seemingly random patterns, yet somehow formed a harmonious whole. Streets curved unexpectedly, creating spaces for surprise encounters. Parks erupted in unlikely places. It was perfectly imperfect, and more alive than any Moravian construction had been in centuries. "The silicon consciousness has something to share as well," Dr. Sarah Chen added, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Confederation. "They've developed what they're calling quantum jazz, a fusion of human musical concepts with quantum computing. It's, well, listen." The hall filled with music that shouldn't have been possible, digital sequences that incorporated randomness and emotion in ways that defied logic yet touched something deep in every being present. Zyra Nell's scales danced with the rhythm, something she would never have allowed herself to do in the past. But the most remarkable development, Sarah continued, is how different civilizations are learning from each other, not just from us. The display showed scenes from across the galaxy. The crystalline beings of the Lithic Communion had taken Maya's art lessons and shared them with the Aetherian Cloud Collective, leading to the creation of three-dimensional crystal sculptures that floated in gas giant atmospheres, creating ever-changing light patterns. The Quantum Concordat, inspired by human children's playgrounds, had designed learning centers where young beings could safely experiment with quantum principles through play. Their educational efficiency had decreased by traditional metrics, but innovation and creativity had soared. "We thought we were teaching them to hope," Sarah said softly, "but they're teaching each other how to live." High Commander Venexa, his cybernetic enhancements now incorporating organic elements, another imperfect improvement, joined them in the hall. "The great diminishing is not just stopped," he reported. "It's being transformed. Look at this. The display shifted to show a phenomenon that scientists had begun calling the awakening. Civilizations that had fallen into stagnation were not simply returning to their former states. They were evolving into something new. The rigid perfection of the past was being replaced by a dynamic balance between order and chaos, tradition and innovation, certainty and wonder. The Lithic Communion sent us this. Miravex announced. They call it the Symphony of Flaws. The crystal beings had created a massive installation where their traditional perfect harmonies were deliberately interrupted by discordant notes. But instead of creating chaos, these imperfections served as bridges between different musical traditions from across the galaxy. Human jazz melded with Aetherian wind patterns and silicon quantum harmonics, creating something entirely new. They're not just embracing imperfection, Zyra Nell realized, her scales shifting through patterns of joy and wonder. They're using it as a tool for connection. The very things that make us different, that make us imperfect, are becoming the foundations for something greater. Sarah nodded. In human mythology, we have a story about a tower that reached for the heavens, but fell because everyone was forced to be the same. Maybe the real way to reach the stars is to celebrate our differences, our flaws, our unique ways of seeing the universe. The Hall of Civilizations hummed with energy as more reports flooded in. The Moravians had opened their experimental city to other species, creating neighborhoods where different architectural styles collided and collaborated. The Silicon Consciousness had begun hosting error appreciation ceremonies, where unexpected computational results were studied for their creative potential. Even the youngest civilizations, previously ignored by the galactic community, were being invited to share their unique perspectives. Their primitive struggles and solutions offered fresh insights to ancient races that had forgotten the value of starting over. We've received a message from Earth's Hope Court, Miravex announced. They're requesting something unprecedented. They want to learn from us now. They say that watching alien civilizations rediscover their creativity has taught them new ways of thinking about human challenges. Zyra Nell's scales rippled with emotion as she realized the perfect symmetry of it. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to hope again, and now the galaxy would help humanity reach even further than they could have alone. 5 years ago, she said, addressing the assembled representatives, we feared the end of growth, of creativity, of hope itself. We looked to humanity to save us from perfection. She gestured at the display, showing the vibrant, chaotic, beautiful renaissance spreading across the stars. But look what we've created together. Not a return to the past, not a simple adoption of human ways, but something entirely new. A civilization that grows stronger through its imperfections, richer through its differences, more alive through its willingness to fail and try again. The quantum display now showed not just points of light, but the connections between them. A vast network of civilizations learning, sharing, growing together. The Great Diminishing had been transformed into the Great Awakening, and the galaxy was more alive than ever before. In the end, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy hadn't been hope alone. It had been the courage to be imperfect together. And in that imperfection, they had all found something better than perfection. They had found growth, connection, and a future full of endless possibilities.